The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Forum was the largest room ever built by any living species. It floated in orbit around a dead star called Palux 9, chosen because no one owned it and no one wanted it. The chamber was shaped like a bowl, with thousands of seats rising in circles from a central platform, where speakers stood when they had something to say. Every seat had a translation device built into it, because the galaxy spoke in over 9,000 languages, and nobody agreed on which one was best. On this particular day, the chamber was full. Representatives from 612 species sat in their assigned sections. Some were tall and thin like glass. Some were short and heavy like wet stone. Some floated in sealed tanks of liquid because they could not breathe air. Clicks, hums, growls, whistles, and something that sounded like a bag of rocks being shaken. That was how the Pilari said hello. Speaker Olivan stood at the central platform. He was old, even by the standards of his species, the Centauri, who lived for nearly 1,000 standard years. His skin was pale blue and covered in fine cracks like old pottery. He had been the chair of the forum for 40 cycles, and he had seen every kind of argument, deal, betrayal, and miracle that politics could produce. Very little surprised him anymore. He raised one long hand, and the chamber slowly grew quiet. "We move now to Agenda Item 14, Olivan said, his voice calm and practiced. The renewal of the Shared Resource Accord between the Outer Rim territories. I call upon the delegation from Earth to present their position." He turned to the section on the upper left of the chamber. It was a modest section, only about 30 seats, because humans had only been part of the forum for 87 cycles. That was nothing compared to species who had been members for thousands of years. But those 30 seats had always been full. The humans were never late. They were never absent. Their senior ambassador, a man named Tejo, had not missed a single session in over 20 years. But today, the seats were empty. Olivan blinked. He looked again, as if his old eyes were playing tricks on him. The seats were definitely empty. Not just Tejo's seat, all of them. Every single human chair was vacant. The small flag of Earth that usually stood at the front of their section was gone. The translation device screens were dark. "Ambassador Tejo?" Olivan called out, more from habit than hope. Silence. A low murmur began to spread through the chamber. It started in the rows closest to the empty human section and moved outward, like a wave. Heads turned. Eyes of every shape and color looked toward those 30 dark seats. Emissary Goal of the Kalani Collective leaned forward in his chair. He was a small creature, barely a meter tall, with large wet eyes and fingers that never stopped moving. Goal was known for being nervous, but he was also one of the best intelligence gatherers in the galaxy. He tapped his personal device and began pulling data. Within seconds, his already large eyes grew wider. "They are gone," he whispered to his aide. "Not just from the forum, from everywhere." It was true. Across the galaxy, on every station, outpost, trade hub, and embassy where humans had been present, the story was the same. The humans had packed their things, closed their offices, and left. Quietly, completely, without a single word of explanation. Olivan felt something he had not felt in a very long time. It took him a moment to recognize it, because it had been so many years. It was fear. He knew his history. Every species in the forum did. The last time a member had voluntarily withdrawn from the forum was 400 cycles ago, when the Ruin Imperium pulled its delegates home. 3 days later, the Ruin launched a war that killed billions and burned entire systems to ash. The withdrawal had been a signal, a final message before violence. But humans were not the Ruin. Olivan told himself this firmly. Humans were the ones who stopped wars, not started them. Tejo had personally negotiated the end of the Fenris border crisis. Human doctors had cured the blue rot plague that nearly wiped out the Yenari. Human engineers had rebuilt the communication relays in the shattered corridor after the last Thallic expansion. Humans were helpers. They were fixers. They were the ones who always showed up. And now they were gone. Warden Dressa of the Thallic Dominion broke the silence. He was massive, nearly 3 meters tall, with armored skin the color of burnt iron. His voice was deep and loud, and he used it like a weapon, even when he was not angry. "Good," Dressa said, leaning back in his oversized chair. "The primates have finally realized they do not belong here. They were always too soft for real galactic politics. Let them run home to their little yellow star." A few delegates from species allied with the Thallic laughed nervously, but most of the chamber stayed silent. Even Dressa's own officers, seated behind him, did not smile. They had served on the border. They had seen what human ships could do during joint exercises. They knew that soft was not the right word. Olivan raised his hand again for order. His mind was already racing. He needed to send a message to Earth. He needed to understand what had happened. He needed Tejo to answer his calls. But deep down, in a place he did not like to visit, Olivan already understood something that most of the chamber had not yet figured out. The humans had not left because they were weak. They had not left because they were afraid. They had left because they had chosen to. And a species that chose to walk away from everything it had built, calmly and without anger, was far more dangerous than one that slammed the door. The session continued, but nobody was listening anymore. Every delegate in that enormous bowl of a room was thinking the same thing, even if they would not say it out loud. What had they done to make the humans leave? And what would happen now that they were gone? 3 days after the empty seats were discovered at the forum, the full picture began to take shape, and it was worse than anyone had imagined. Mireille sat in a dark room, deep inside Earth's orbital command station, 60,000 kilometers above the Pacific Ocean. She was the intelligence director of the Earth Defense Council, and her job was to see everything and say very little. She was good at both. Screens floated in the air around her, each one showing a different part of the galaxy. On every screen the same thing was happening. Human personnel were boarding transports and coming home. It was not messy. It was not rushed. It was the most organized withdrawal in galactic history. Every human embassy had followed the same steps in the same order. First, they had backed up all shared data and sent copies to their alien hosts, so no one could say Earth had stolen anything. Second, they had transferred ownership of any jointly operated facilities, signed and documented properly. Third, they had said polite but brief goodbyes to their local colleagues. And fourth, they had left. Mireille watched a feed from the Kalani border station. A young human trade officer was shaking hands with a Kalani merchant who looked like he was about to cry. The human smiled kindly, said something too quiet for the microphone to catch, and then walked on to the transport. The door closed. The ship lifted away. The Kalani merchant stood alone on the platform for a long time, holding a small gift the human had left behind. Mireille closed that screen. She did not need to feel things right now. She needed to work. On the other side of the galaxy, alien governments were doing what they always did when they did not understand something. They panicked quietly and spied loudly. The Kalani Collective sent 3 stealth probes toward Sol, Earth's home system. They were the best probes the Kalani had, nearly invisible to standard sensors. The probes made it about 2 light-years from Sol before they hit the warning line. It was a network of automated buoys, thousands of them, spread in a perfect sphere around human space. Each buoy carried the same message, broadcast on every frequency in 4,000 languages. The message was simple. It said, "Earth thanks you for your patience. Please maintain your distance." The probes stopped. The Kalani intelligence officers stared at their screens. They had not even known humans could build a sensor network that large. They turned the probes around and went home. Aboard a mid-range transport ship moving through quiet space, Taeho sat by a window and watched the stars pass. He had spent 23 years as Earth's senior ambassador to the Galactic Forum. He had walked into that grand chamber as a young man full of hope, believing that if humans just worked hard enough and gave enough, the galaxy would accept them as equals. He had been wrong. He pulled up his personal log and began to speak, not because anyone would listen, but because he needed to hear the words out loud. "In my first year," he said, "we shared our water purification technology with the Ynnari, for free. They were dying. Their rivers had turned to poison. We asked for nothing in return. They recovered. 2 years later, when we asked the Ynnari to support a vote protecting neutral trade lanes, they voted against us because the Thalic pressured them. They never even apologized." He paused, watching a distant nebula drift past the window. "In my 9th year, we cured the blue rot plague. 6 worlds were saved. The Forum thanked us in a ceremony that lasted 10 minutes. The same session, they spent 4 hours debating Thalic mining rights. When I asked for humanitarian protections for human aid workers in conflict zones, the motion was tabled. It has never been brought back." His voice was not angry. That was the thing that would have scared anyone listening. There was no rage in it, just a deep, heavy tiredness, like a man who had been carrying something for too long and had finally set it down. "Last year," Taeho continued, "Thalic raiders attacked our colony on Aerith 6. They killed 41 people, farmers, teachers, children. I brought evidence to the Forum. Sensor logs, debris analysis, even a captured Thalic weapon with serial numbers. Warden Dressa blocked the investigation. He said the evidence was fabricated, and the Forum let him. They let him because challenging the Thalic was uncomfortable, and we were just humans. We were the species that would always forgive, always come back, always keep helping." He stopped the recording. His communicator had 19 unread messages. 12 were from various alien delegations asking what was happening. 3 were from Emissary Gaul, each more desperate than the last. 1 was from Speaker Olivan himself, carefully worded and dignified, asking Taeho to please respond at his earliest convenience. Taeho read them all. He replied to none. He remembered the call from Admiral Yuna 3 weeks ago. She had not raised her voice. She never did. She had simply said, "Come home, Taeho. We gave them everything. They gave us lessons." And that had been enough. Back in the galaxy, the first cracks were already showing. The neutral trade hub at Corin Station, which humans had operated for 60 years, went dark. It had handled 30% of all cross-species commerce in the Eastern Spiral Arm. Without human staff to manage the translation systems, the cargo manifests, and the security protocols, ships began to stack up in orbit, with nowhere to dock and no one to process their goods. On the border world of Fenris 3, a human-run medical station that served 3 different species shut its doors. The last human doctor had left a note pinned to the entrance. It read, "We are sorry. We wish you well. The medicine cabinet is unlocked." Within a week, the first patients began to die from a fungal infection that the human doctors had been treating easily for years. No other species had bothered to learn how, because the humans had always been there to do it. The galaxy was starting to learn a very old and very painful lesson. You never know what you have until it walks away. And when what you had was the only species willing to do the thankless, invisible, necessary work that held everything together, its absence was not just noticeable, it was catastrophic. It took exactly 19 days for the galaxy to start falling apart. The first fight was between the Kalani Collective and the Morith Union over a gas mining claim in the Tessara Nebula. It was an old argument, nearly 100 cycles old, and it had never turned violent because Taeho had personally kept both sides talking. He had spent 6 years building a shared profit agreement that neither side loved but both could live with. That agreement required annual review meetings, and the meetings required a neutral mediator, and the neutral mediator had always been human. Now there was no mediator. The colony sent mining ships, the Morith sent warships. Within 48 hours, 3 colony vessels were destroyed, and the Morith had claimed the entire nebula. Emissary Goal screamed about it at the forum. Nobody stopped the Morith. Nobody knew how. The second fight was worse. 2 small species, the Polari and the Voss, shared a planet in a binary star system. They had coexisted for centuries, but their peace treaty had been written by human legal scholars and was maintained by a human arbitration office on their shared capital city. When the office closed, both sides found reasons to argue about the treaty's terms. The Polari said the water rights clause favored the Voss. The Voss said the land boundary was unfair. By the end of the month, there were soldiers on both sides of the river, and the first shots had been fired. Speaker Olivan watched all of this from the forum with growing horror. He called emergency sessions. He made speeches. He begged for calm. But Olivan was a chairman, not a diplomat. He could run a meeting, but he could not read a room the way Tejo could. He could not sit across from 2 enemies, pour them both a drink, and somehow make them laugh at the same thing before steering them toward agreement. That was a human skill, and Olivan had never valued it until it was gone. And then there was Dressa. The warden of the Phallic Dominion had been waiting for an opportunity like this his entire career. With no human observers monitoring the borders, no human intelligence officers reporting violations, and no human diplomats pushing for accountability, Dressa was free to do what the Phallic had always wanted to do: expand. His fleet moved fast. In 1 week, Phallic warships occupied 2 neutral systems on their southern border. The systems were small and undefended, home to mining colonies and research stations that belonged to species too weak to fight back. Dressa called it a restoration of historical Phallic territory. Everyone else called it what it was: conquest. The forum voted to condemn the Phallic action. Dressa ignored the vote. In the old days, Tejo would have built a coalition. He would have called in favors, applied economic pressure, and quietly made it clear to Dressa that the cost of expansion was higher than the reward. But Tejo was not there. The coalition did not form. The pressure did not come. And Dressa learned what every bully learns when the teacher leaves the room. He could do whatever he wanted. The humanitarian crisis on Fenris 3 grew worse by the day. The fungal plague that human doctors had been managing spread to 2 more settlements. Local medical teams from the 3 resident species tried to treat it, but they did not have the training or the supplies. The humans had offered to teach them for years. They had always said no. Why learn to do something yourself when someone else will do it for free? Now, the answer to that question was dying in overcrowded clinics with no medicine and no hope. Olivan made one last attempt. He recorded a public broadcast, transmitted on every open channel in the galaxy, addressed directly to Earth. He stood tall and spoke carefully. He acknowledged that the forum had not always treated humans fairly. He said that Earth's contributions had been essential and underappreciated. He asked, with as much dignity as he could hold, for the humans to please come back and help the galaxy find its way. The message traveled at the speed of light across the stars. It reached the warning buoys around human space, and the only response was the same automated recording that had been playing for weeks. Earth thanks you for your patience. Please maintain your distance. Olivan sat down after the broadcast and put his head in his hands. His aide brought him water. He did not drink it. Far away, behind the wall of buoys, Mireille watched Olivan's broadcast on a delayed feed. She noted the time, the content, and the emotional tone. Then she walked down a long corridor to Admiral Yuna's office. Yuna was standing at a window that looked out over Earth. The planet was blue and green and white, turning slowly in the sunlight. It looked peaceful. It was not. The Phallic have taken 2 more systems, Murray said. Fenris 3 is approaching critical. The Pilari-Voss conflict is escalating, and Olivun made a public appeal. Una nodded. How did the galaxy respond to his appeal? Mixed. Some species are sympathetic. Most are too busy with their own problems now. Good, Una said, and the word is not cruel. It was strategic. That means they are almost ready. She turned from the window. Tell Hajin to move Project Veil to final testing, and tell Dowan to begin positioning the fleet. No one sees them until I say so. Mireille nodded and left. In a lab buried beneath the surface of Mars, Hajin ran his hands over a control panel that only 7 people in the galaxy knew existed. Project Veil was his life's work. 10 years of research. 10 years of building something that he hoped would never be used, but knew would be needed. He activated the test sequence. Across the solar system, hidden platforms powered up, connected, and formed a network so vast and so silent that it made the warning buoys look like toys. Hajin watched the readings stabilize and let out a long breath. The galaxy was tearing itself apart, and humanity was getting ready to put it back together. But this time, they would not ask. They would not beg. They would not hope for gratitude that never came. This time, they would set the terms. 6 months after the humans left, the galaxy looked like a broken mirror. Every piece reflected something ugly. 12 active conflicts burned across 3 spiral arms. 2 famines had taken hold on worlds that used to receive human agricultural aid. A refugee crisis was growing along the Phallic border, where millions of displaced people from the annexed systems had nowhere to go because the species that might have taken them in were too busy fighting their own wars. The Forum still met, but the Grand Chamber was half empty now. Some species had pulled their delegates home out of fear. Others had stopped coming because there was no point. Without enforcement, without mediation, without the quiet human machinery that had kept everything running, the Forum was just a room where people yelled at each other in 9,000 languages. Speaker Olivun looked 10 years older than he had 6 months ago. The cracks on his pale blue skin had deepened. His hands shook when he held his speaking staff. But he had not given up, because giving up was not something Forum chairs were allowed to do. So he did something that no chair had done in the entire history of the Galactic Forum. He left the neutral station, boarded a diplomatic vessel, and traveled to Sol. It took 3 days of faster-than-light travel to reach the edge of human space. When his ship arrived at the warning buoy line, Olivun transmitted his identity and his request. He asked, very simply, to speak with someone in charge. There was no reply for 6 hours. Then a single message came back. You may proceed to Earth orbit. Dock at Station 7. Someone will meet you. Olivun's ship crossed into human space and traveled to Earth. He had never visited the human homeworld before. Most alien leaders had not. Humans had always come to them. As his ship approached, Olivun looked out the viewport and saw the planet for the first time. It was small by galactic standards, quiet, a little ball of blue water and green land hanging in the dark. He thought about how such a small world had produced a species that held the entire galaxy together with nothing but stubbornness and kindness, and he felt something heavy settle in his chest. He docked at Station 7 and was escorted to a waiting room. It was clean, comfortable, and completely ordinary. There were chairs, a table, and a window with a view of the planet below. A human attendant brought him water and a small bowl of dried fruit, and told him politely that Ambassador Tejo would see him soon. Olivun waited. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. He was not mistreated. The food was good. The room was warm. But no one came to talk to him, and he understood why. Every hour he sat in that room, the galaxy watched. News of his journey had spread instantly. Every species, with a functioning communication system, knew that the chair of the Galactic Forum was sitting in a human waiting room, and the humans were making him wait. It was not cruelty. It was a message. On the morning of the fourth day, the door opened, and Tejo walked in. He looked different from the last time Olivon had seen him. He was rested. His eyes were clear. The tiredness that had lived on his face for the last decade was gone. He smiled warmly, shook Olivon's hand, and sat down across from him. "Speaker," Tejo said, "I am sorry for the wait. I hope you have been comfortable." "I have," Olivon said. "Tejo, the galaxy is dying. I am not here for politics. I am here to beg." Tejo poured tea for both of them. It was a human custom, Olivon knew. It meant the conversation was serious, but not hostile. Tejo pushed a cup across the table, and Olivon took it. "You do not need to beg. Earth is ready to return." Relief flooded through Olivon like warm light. But it lasted only a moment, because Tejo was not finished. "We will return," Tejo continued, "but not as a member of the Forum. We will return as a permanent arbitrator with binding authority. Our decisions and disputes will be final, not advisory. This is not negotiable." Olivon opened his mouth, then closed it. "Every species that received human aid over the past 87 years will sign retroactive compensation accords. Not as punishment, but as acknowledgement. The galaxy will formally recognize the value of what was given freely and taken for granted." Tejo's voice was calm, gentle even, but his eyes did not move. "A new galactic charter will be written. It will include protections for neutral parties, humanitarian workers, and border colonies. It will include enforcement mechanisms that do not depend on any single species volunteering to do the right thing." He paused and sipped his tea. "And the Thalic Dominion will withdraw from every system it has occupied in the last 6 months. They will submit to an independent review of their military actions. If they refuse, they will face collective enforcement, led by Earth." Olivon stared at him. These were not requests. They were not suggestions. They were terms. The kind of terms a winning side presents to a losing side at the end of a war. Except there had been no war. There had only been silence, and the silence had been more devastating than any weapon. "Tejo," Olivon whispered, "the Thalic will never accept this." "They will," Tejo said simply. At that moment, far from Earth, in the black space between stars, where no one was supposed to be looking, Hajin pressed a single button. Project Veil went active. Thousands of stealth platforms, hidden in deep space for months, powered up simultaneously. They formed a network that covered every contested zone, every border, every strategic choke point in the galaxy. They were not weapons. They did not fire. They did something much worse. They could reach into any ship within range and shut it down. Power cores, navigation, weapons, shields, communications, all of it disabled instantly, cleanly, and without any possibility of defense. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. No one had even imagined it was possible. Meanwhile, in Thalic space, Warden Dressa received a report about Olivon's visit to Earth. He read the terms Tejo had offered. His armored face twisted with rage. He slammed his fist on the table hard enough to crack it. "They think they can dictate to us?" he roared. "They are insects. They are nothing." He turned to his fleet commanders. "Prepare every ship we have. We go to Sol. We burn them and their little blue planet, and we end this forever." 400 Balik warships began to move. And far away, aboard the ESS Horizon, Captain Dowan received a quiet message from Admiral Yuna. It contained only 2 words: "They're coming." Dowan smiled, not with joy, not with anger, with the tired calm of someone who had hoped it would not come to this, but had prepared for it anyway. He gave the order. 60 human ships slipped out of hiding and moved to intercept. The corridor between phallic territory and Sol was a stretch of empty space that had no name. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened, too far from any star to matter, too dark to attract attention. But on this day, it became the most watched place in the galaxy. Warden Dressa's armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel, like a fist coming through a wall. 400 warships, the largest phallic fleet assembled in over 2 centuries. Battle cruisers the size of small cities. Destroyers bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. Carriers full of fighter craft ready to swarm. Dressa stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Wrath, and stared into the darkness ahead. What he saw made him pause. 60 human ships hung in the void, arranged in a loose crescent. They were not in an attack formation. They were not in a defensive formation. They were just there, floating quietly, their running lights blinking soft white against the black. 60 against 400. Dressa almost laughed. Almost. Captain Dowen stood on the bridge of the ESS Horizon and watched the phallic fleet fill his sensor display. Red dots, hundreds of them, spreading across the screen like a disease. His crew was silent. Every officer was at their station. No one spoke, because there was nothing to say that they had not already said to each other in the weeks of preparation. Dowen opened a communication channel. His voice was broadcast across every frequency, so that both fleets and anyone else listening could hear. "Warden Dressa," Dowen said. His tone was polite, conversational even, like a man greeting a neighbor across a fence. "Welcome. Earth appreciates you making the trip." Dressa's response came fast and hard. "Stand aside, human. You are outnumbered. You are outgunned. Move your ships, or we will move them for you. There will be nothing left of your fleet but dust." Dowen nodded, as if Dressa had said something perfectly reasonable. "You are welcome to proceed, Warden, but I want to make sure you understand what happens next." The words hung in space for a moment. Then Dowen gave a small signal to his communications officer, who relayed it to a frequency that traveled not to any ship, but to something hidden much further away. In his lab beneath the surface of Mars, Hajin watched his screen and waited. When the signal arrived, he closed his eyes for 1 second, took a breath, and activated Project Veil. It happened everywhere at once. Across Dressa's entire armada, 400 warships suddenly went wrong. It started small, a flicker in the lighting, a navigation screen blinking to static, a weapon system displaying an error message that no one had ever seen before. Then it grew. Shields collapsed. Power cores dropped to emergency levels. Engine controls locked. Weapons refused to charge. Communication arrays went dead, then came back online, then died again. In less than 30 seconds, the most powerful military fleet the Phallic Dominion had ever assembled was completely helpless. 400 warships, dead in the water, drifting in the dark like empty cans. No explosion, no blast, no fire, just silence. On the bridge of the Dominion's Wrath, alarms screamed from every direction. Officers shouted over each other, trying to restart systems that would not respond. The lights flickered between emergency red and total darkness. Dressa gripped his command chair so hard that the metal bent under his fingers. For the first time in his life, his voice was not loud. Dowen's voice came through the speakers, clear and calm, because human communication systems were the only things still working in the entire corridor. "We could have done this from Sol, Warden. We came here so you could see our faces when we did it." Dressa stared at the main screen, where the 60 human ships still floated in their quiet crescent. They had not moved, they had not fired, they had not even raised their shields. They had simply stood there while his entire fleet was turned off like a light switch. Your weapons, engines, and shields will remain offline for exactly 1 hour, Dowen continued. That is enough time for you to make a decision. You can accept the terms offered by Ambassador Tejo, withdraw from the occupied systems, and submit to review. Or you can refuse, and we will leave, and your fleet will eventually power back on. But Warden, I promise you, the next time, we will not be this patient. The channel stayed open. Dowen waited. On the bridge of the Dominion's Wrath, Dressa looked at his officers. They looked back at him with something he had never seen in Talic eyes before. Doubt. One by one, they turned away from him. The senior fleet commander reached for his own communication panel and opened a direct channel to the horizon. Captain Dowen, the commander said, this is Fleet Commander Baruch of the Phallic Dominion. Warden Dressa is reconsidering. We accept the terms. Dressa opened his mouth to object. No one listened. The news traveled fast. Across the galaxy, on every station and every world with a functioning receiver, people watched the footage. The Phallic fleet, the most feared military force in 3 spiral arms, sitting dead and dark while 60 human ships floated peacefully in front of them. At the Galactic Forum, the remaining delegates watched in absolute silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Speaker Olivan stood at the central platform, the new galactic charter displayed on the screen behind him. He had brought it back from Earth, exactly as Tejo had written it. Olivan picked up his pen and signed. One by one, the other delegations followed. The Kelani, the Morith, the Pilari, the Voss, the Yanari. Even species that had never cared about the Forum suddenly wanted to be part of whatever came next. By the end of the day, every member had signed. 2 days later, Tejo returned to the Grand Chamber. He walked in alone, wearing the same simple suit he had always worn. He crossed the floor without ceremony, climbed the steps to the human section, and sat down in his old seat. The chamber was full. Every seat was occupied. When Tejo settled into his chair, there was no applause, no cheering. The silence that filled the room was something deeper and more complicated than celebration. It was the sound of 600 species understanding, all at once, what they had almost lost. Olivun looked at Tejo from the central platform. Their eyes met. Olivun gave a single slow nod. Tejo nodded back. On Earth, Admiral Yuna stood at her window, watching the planet turn. Mireille stood beside her, holding a datapad showing the signed charter and the Phallic withdrawal orders. They will resent us for this, Yuna said quietly. Eventually, they will forget how bad it was, and they will only remember that we forced them to change. Mireille nodded. Probably. Yuna was silent for a long moment. They will be alive to resent us. That is enough. In his lab on Mars, Hajin powered down the Veil control interface. The screens went dark one by one. The hum of the network faded into silence. He sat alone in the quiet room and stared at his hands. Hope we never need this again, he said to no one. Years later, a Kelani historian named Gaul, the same emissary Gaul who had once sent desperate messages to a transport ship that never replied, wrote the definitive account of the human withdrawal. He spent a decade researching it. He interviewed thousands of people from hundreds of species. And at the end of his book, after all the facts and analysis and testimony, he wrote a single closing line that became the most quoted sentence in galactic literature. The humans did not leave because they hated us. They left because they loved us enough to make us understand what we had lost. The book was translated into 9,000 languages. It was read on every world in the Forum. And on Earth, in a quiet house by the sea, a retired ambassador named Tejo read it too. He closed the book, looked out at the ocean, and smiled. Not because the words were about him, but because, after everything, someone had finally understood.